the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's July 17th, 2014. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, the political blame game begins after a flight is shot down in Ukraine. And President Obama proves that the pen is mightier than the AK-47 as he signs away Second Amendment rights. That's next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
They're going for broke! This is it, dumbasses! There's no more time to screw around! Get yourselves in gear, police, that serve this system!
Well, war is breaking out everywhere. We have two stories, one about an airliner that shot down in the Ukraine, and that is being used by many parties to try to push for a broader, more escalated war. Also, Israel has invaded Gaza. We're going to cover both of those tonight, but first, the airline in the Ukraine. The FAA has been warning for quite some time for planes not to fly over that area. The FAA prohibited U.S. airlines back on April the 25th from flying over the disputed area where this plane was shot down. And also, the United Nations warned airlines back in April 3rd to avoid the area. Nevertheless, they did fly over this area. 295 people have been killed, no survivors from that plane. It's a great tragedy, but the greater tragedy would be to allow forces to expand this into a world war. And we've seen that narrative being used over and over again, just as we saw in Syria a year ago. Remember that it was just one minor royal figure who was shot that triggered World War I 100 years ago, approximately. How much more so could they use the death of 295 people to try to start World War III? Well, the question on everybody's mind now is who shot down the Malaysian airliner? There is a report that Paul Joseph Watson has put up, very good report, analyzing what at this moment everybody is saying, pro and con from both different sides. We're going to look, though, more at the press coverage and what the people in the United States government are using to try to push for war, how that's being echoed by CNN and others to push for it. Now, the Western press has wasted no time at all in immediately identifying the precise missile that was used and, of course, identifying pro-Russian forces as being the ones who shot it down. We see on CNN, and here's a story from the Mirror in the UK, showing the Buk Russian-built surface-to-air missile launcher. Now, they're saying that the altitude that this took place rules out the 15,000 approximately man-pad surface-to-air missiles that the American government has put in the hands of terrorists worldwide. So they say it needs to be something other than that, and they're identifying this Buk launcher. Now, they don't have anything really to go on by except for a tweet that was put up momentarily and then taken down, supposedly by the rebel forces. They supposedly tweeted out that they had shot it down, and that came down. That should be suspicious to anybody who's been watching what's been revealed in the last couple of weeks from the Snowden documents, showing that the government has an all-out campaign to control public opinion through social media. But look at where they're coming from with this. They point out that the rebels had these Buk launchers, that they stole them from the Ukrainian government. Well, if they stole them from the Ukrainian government still has them. Look at this article going back to July. This is the 5th of July, and the caption on this picture says, Ukrainian government forces are maneuvering anti-aircraft missile launchers, Buk launchers, as they're being transported. So the Ukrainian government has it as well. Then we see a story from about 6 days earlier. On June 29th, there was a story that came out of ITAR TASS news agency saying that the Donetsk Defense Forces have taken control of an army unit equipped with missile defense systems. And again, they identify that same Buk missile system, saying, however, that they don't know the number or the condition of the missiles that they have. Now, this should sound very, very similar. Just 1 year ago in Syria, there was a sarin gas attack. We were told at the time that the only possible suspect could be the Assad government, that they were the only ones who had sarin gas. However, there had been previous sarin gas attacks. And we learned from UN investigations, as well as from Russian investigations, that that sarin gas attack was done by rebel forces, not by government forces. Still, the Obama administration pushed forward, trying to push us into an escalated war. At that point, American forces released information showing the same intel, and that started to bring things down. Now we see the same thing happening here. We're told precisely what this missile is, even though they don't have any pictures or eyewitnesses of this missile. They say it must be this Buk launcher. And we're told that rebels had Buk launchers, so because they stole them from the Ukrainian government, so it must have been the rebels, even though both sides have possession of that same rocket launcher. Now, Strobe Talbert of the Brookings Institute has wasted no time at all. Remember that the Brookings Institute is a very influential think tank, perhaps the most influential think tank for the Democrats. It's left-leaning. And he tweeted out right away that Russia was to blame for shooting down the Malaysian airline plane. And he said he subsequently pulled that down, even though it had by that time been retweeted about 1,000 times. Now, an expert, an aviation expert in this article that Paul Joseph Watson quotes, Major Charles Heyman, told Sky News in the UK that it's likely that he thought Ukrainians were responsible for the incident. Why not? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But let's look at some more reactions. More Democrats are blaming Russia for the passenger plane shootdown. This is an article from Kurt Nimmo. This is a quote from the New Republic, and this is what this writer says. Make no mistake, this is a really, really, really big deal. This is the first downing of a civilian jetliner in this conflict, and if it were the rebels who brought it down, all kinds of ugly things will follow. For one thing, what seemed to be gelling into a frozen local conflict has now broken into a new phase that directly threatens European security. The plane, let's recall, was flying from Amsterdam. Now, she's not alone. CNN has also said this is a watershed event. For the first time, it focuses world attention on this Russia and Ukraine conflict. Really? For the first time? This is something that is not a local conflict. Our Western press has been pushing this so hard that they have succeeded in reviving the Cold War to the levels that it hasn't been for decades. So this is not anything new. What's new is that they now have another excuse that they can try to push, just as they did the sarin gas attack. And it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans as well. John McCain, of course, and I'm sure Lindsey Graham will be joining him. Those are the two war hawks that love to always push for war in every event, no matter what happens. Well, McCain says that Putin should pay if the Malaysian airline jet was shot down. He says if it's determined that Ukrainian separatists shot down the Malaysian Airlines plane that crashed on Thursday, Vladimir Putin should face the consequences, said John McCain. And this is reported by Roll Call. Well, what would those consequences be? We need to ask about that, just as we need to ask what the consequences would be if we escalated the Syrian war as well. Now, is this something that could have been done by the Ukrainians, as other people have suggested? Let's remember history before we jump into an even broader war. Remember that even though it was largely ignored in the American press because it happened right after September 11th in 2001, it was back in October of 2001 that the Ukrainians actually did shoot down a Russian airliner over the Black Sea. And it took them 9 days to admit it, but going back to this Guardian article in 12th of October 2001, they say a Ukrainian official today admitted that his country's military may have mistakenly shot down a Russian commercial airliner over the Black Sea last week, killing all 78 people on board. And they went on to say the reason for the crash could be an unintentional hit by an S-200 missile during Ukrainian air defense exercises. Well, they didn't need to have a Buk missile system. They could have shot it down with an S-200. Who knows what kind of missile shot it down if it was, in fact, shot down by a missile. I mean, it could have been blown up by a terrorist bomb on board. But note that they said that this happened, they think, by mistake during a Ukrainian air defense missile drill. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something that happened in America 18 years ago on this very day, July 17th, 1996? Well, that's what Anderson Cooper said on CNN. Here's his comment.
No doubt about it. I want to go to our Ben Wiedemann, who's in Gaza City. Before I do, I just want to correct something I said regarding the plane crash. Earlier, I said that today was the anniversary of flight TWA 800. crashing off the coast of Long Island in 1996. I believe I said it was shot down. Obviously, the government said it was a center fuel tank explosion, though some people had indicated they saw a rocket. There's no evidence of that. It was ruled to be a center fuel tank explosion, so I apologize for misspeaking about that anniversary.
That was his retraction. Earlier, he had said and just moved on that Flight 800 was shot down on this same day in 1996. Over 200 people were killed in that incident. And there were many, many eyewitnesses. It was just a year ago, remember, that Yahoo News covered, and we put up on INFOWARS.com, that TWA Flight 800 crash was not due to a gas tank explosion, says former investigators. Now, this is an article about a documentary that was about to be released a year ago, and they said 6 former investigators who took part in the film say there was a cover-up, and they want the case reopened. This is a senior accident investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board who said there was a lack of coordination and willful denial of information. He said there were 755 witnesses to Flight 800, TWA Flight 800. At no time was any of their information provided by the witnesses shared by the FBI with the National Transportation Safety Board. Jim Spear, an accident investigator at the time of the crash for the Airline Pilots Association, who shifted through the recovered wreckage in a hangar, said he discovered holes consistent with those that would have been formed by a high-energy blast in the right wing. He requested that it be tested for explosives. When the test came back positive for explosives, he was physically removed from the room by 2 CIA agents. So before we jump into war, let's understand that the Ukraine actually did, in 2001, shoot down a Russian airliner. They admitted it. They said it was an accident, that it flew over an area where they were having naval exercises. We have 755 witnesses who actually saw a missile going towards Flight 800. We have pilots who said they saw a flare going up into the plane for Flight 800. And yet our government lied about that, and they covered that up. And yet our government knows exactly what the missile was and who fired it within just a short period of time in the Ukraine. I don't think we need to take that very seriously, but let's look at something else that touches on government lies about plane crashes. Let's take a look at the pictures of this plane crash. Now remember, this is a plane crash that as of this moment, everyone agrees it was hit by a missile at about 30,000 feet in the air, broke up in the air, and crashed to the ground. And I want you to take a look at the pictures online at this crash site and compare the pictures of this crash site in the Ukraine, where we have a plane that exploded at 30,000 feet and then hit the ground. We had a lot of witnesses say they saw it come in. I want you to compare that to Flight 93 that we're told drove straight into the ground, that did not explode in midair. Now, at this plane site in Malaysia, they said they've had at least 100 bodies that have been found so far at the scene. Wreckage has spread across an area of about 9 miles in diameter. Now, when we go back and we look at the Flight 93 crash, what happened there, there were 3 debris fields, actually. Make that 4 if we count the engine. In addition to the primary crash site, there were 2 other large debris fields separated by miles. In this case, it was about 8 miles. So in the case of the plane today, it was about a 9-mile radius for the crash debris. In the case of Flight 93, it was about 8 miles. And if you look at the pictures of the crash sites, you see that there is one primary crash site on this map, and then there's an engine located a good distance away from that, and then 2 other major debris fields, about the same size as United Flight 93, which we're told hit the ground. But now, of course, there were airplane parts there. Were there any airplane parts at the Pentagon? We were told that a plane flew into the Pentagon, flew into a building, and completely vaporized, completely disappeared. That building was more destructive to the plane than a plane flying directly into the ground. That simply is not believable. It's not believable from the size of the hole at the Pentagon either. So compare the information that you're getting, compare the summaries and the conclusions that they have arrived at that fit their political agenda. Compare that to the stories that we've heard previously. Stories that have also fit a political agenda. Stories about planes on 9/11. Stories about Flight 800 and TWA. Now, there were 295 people who died in this plane crash today. There have been over 200 people, even before the